This is the third in the UNDP Biodiversity Communications video series. In this video, we are outlining the recommendations and what we call the optimum master story that we've identified through this analysis, this body of work. As a species, we uniquely use stories to make sense of the world and cooperate for our survival. We know we urgently need new and better stories to address the challenges of our time, to establish new narratives as our understanding of the world and what we need to do to survive changes. But we should also understand that we're in an unprecedented era of story wars, because these new stories need to be better than the ones we're already telling ourselves. They need to be more compelling than those currently defending the established but destructive narratives. They also need to be strong enough so that we resist new stories about alternative, self-interested routes to survival as individuals and tribes at the expense of others. At the intersection of COVID-19, the environmental crises facing us, and the human development agenda, there's an opportunity to tell stronger stories rooted deep in our collective psyche and imbued with all that we need for humanity to survive contemporary challenges and flourish. Just a quick reminder that you really need to read, digest, and think about the content in videos 4 and 5, where we present the story tools used to analyze the body of work undertaken in this project, before you review this video and the recommendations and findings presented here. Rosie.
Brilliant, thank you, Ben. So this video will be looking at the recommendations and optimum master story. And in the research design, this sits at a macro level the meso and micro research has fed into the recommendations that we'll provide you with today. So we analysed 53 stories related to biodiversity and the UNDP, and that included non-UNDP biodiversity programmes, UNDP biodiversity programmes, 2020 Super Year Strategy and Events, the Human Development Report over the years from 1990 until the most recent in 2019. We also did Ethiopian biodiversity aligned programmes and private sector aligned programmes. Each of these are sectioned out into their own separate videos. So if you want more information about those, look into the following videos. The findings explored in these videos have been used to inform what we're going to talk through today, which is the recommendations, so how to improve stories and storytelling to make change happen faster, and the optimum master story, so a summary of the insights to be investigated to create the overarching building blocks for the UNDP and biodiversity storytelling. So as I said, in this video, we're going to first run through the recommendations, and we have 3 recommendations that we believe will help strengthen the stories that the UNDP and the biodiversity landscape tell. And then we'll follow with the optimum master story, which fits into the strongest stories framework for telling better stories. And I'll pass over to Guy to go through that a bit later. But first, let's go through the recommendations. So through analysing the 53 different stories, we came up with 3 different recommendations, and they should be used in combination to have the strongest stories. So it's optimised stories, efficient storytelling, and temporal storytelling. And what that means is that you need to optimise stories for the strongest impact, get the right story in the right place at the right time, and make the storytelling efficient to catalyse change. So the first one is optimised stories. So these need to be optimised for the strongest impact. And you can do this by using common methodology and frameworks to determine and share story structures and insights. And we've shared with you in videos 4 and 5 different story tools that you can use to strengthen your story. But then also through our research, we found that there were 4 universal themes that needed to be improved so that the potency of the stories was stronger. And these were audience, change, hope, and trust, which I'll go through now. So audience. In a lot of the stories, there was confusion about who the story is for. And organisations too often put themselves as the hero. And actually an organisation for an organisation, the strongest thing that you can do is put yourself as a mentor. And the stories also need to make nature and humans the hero. All the stories about humans and nature need the who, what, how and why. Often the stories either just had the who and why or the what and how, but there needs to be a combination of all of them. There needs to be a really strong call to action. A lot of the call to adventures were missing, and therefore they couldn't bring in new champions into the story to galvanise support. And then finally, the villain to defeat and success to celebrate. So the villain was often confused with the ordinary world, which meant that there's nothing to defeat, and therefore you couldn't see the success that could be celebrated at the end of the story in the better world. So change needs to happen. People and organisations are seeking change, but not enough change happens in these stories. So you need to make the change the story. So therefore the stories need to be about a journey of change that you want to happen and a journey of change that you are on. Often in the biodiversity landscape and the UNDP stories, there's almost a monotonous tragedy, which means that it's quite overwhelming. There's too much tragedy and frustration. So we need to see solutions brought to life that make stories about rebirth really, really compelling and mean that people want to go on the journey of change rather than feeling overwhelmed by the tragedy that they see. All the stories about hope should include nature and humans in harmony and room for redemption, so that people who are usually seen as villains can actually move into the hero box and help the journey of change. And it also needs to sit in motivational framing. So there needs to be action happening in the story. There needs to be change happening. Otherwise we can't see how the better world will occur. And finally, trust. So the biggest long and short-term problem for the people you most need to influence is trust. And governments, businesses and NGOs are losing trust because people think that capitalism as it exists today does more harm than good in the world. So in order to combat this, we need to celebrate and elevate stories where governments and businesses have put nature and human development at the heart of COVID-19 recovery, and show how by doing the right thing, they are rebuilding trust with the public. Brilliant. So now we're moving on to the second recommendation, which is temporal storytelling. And what that means is getting the right story in the right place and at the right time. So you need to know what to leave out. Long and complex stories are a barrier. If it's too long and too complex, there's not enough action and change to make new champions be brought into the story. You need to tell stories to maximize the motivation for them to go on the journey of change. So who needs to change today, why change needs to happen today, and what steps can be taken today. And we also need to know what to put in. So help people reconstruct the stories they tell themselves about their past so they can move forward and make sense of today by drawing inspiration from the past and future. So to get insight into the present, you also need to look at the past, the future, foresight and hindsight.
And just checking in and setting this all within the context of COVID-19, one of the videos in the series really digs into the intersection of COVID-19, the stories and narratives that are emerging there, and the environment sector's response to COVID-19 in story and narrative. And really here, we're just underlining the point that the recovery stories that are made today are the clearest opportunities for change tomorrow. And as a consequence, the environment and the movement needs to be thinking about setting their stories and narratives within the context of the overarching COVID-19 story that is emerging and moving very rapidly.
Brilliant, thank you, Ben. And then the final recommendation is efficient storytelling. So the storytelling needs to be made efficient to catalyse change. And story, like strategy, is a messy living thing. So the mastery of it to improve impact requires an ongoing cycle, which includes insight into what's working. So that's number one, analyze. Number two, design a framework for optimum design. Number three, test. You need to test what works and what doesn't work. And then number four is refining, so adjusting it for specific stakeholders. And number five is the ability to spread faster, so cascading this out. And this is a continual cycle, which makes the stories efficient and have the most impact and the most potential to create a cascading effect of change. So now I'm going to hand over to Guy, who will speak through the optimum master story, which sits again at the top of the research design, which has been informed by all of the stories that we've analysed.
Thank you. So moving on to the optimum story, the way that we're going to share this information with you is by using a structure which represents the pattern behind the most successful stories. And what that does is it gives us a series of building blocks into which we can put the kind of ingredients that we need to kind of make the strongest story possible. And those ingredients have come from analysing the 53 different stories in depth, and also our sort of understanding of the story marketplace. For more information about this kind of structure, please view video 4. To start with, I'm going to talk about everyday heroes, and in summary, we're talking about doers. So the key thing about this group of people is that they're always looking to make things better for their community, and because of that, they are trusted by those that help. Because we want a richness to capture our interest in storytelling, these people won't be without flaws. So they're kind of complex humans, and that will draw us into the story. So for example, they're haunted by climate breakdown, but they're kind of time poor. And actually sometimes, you know, they can make mistakes because they're blinded by ego and pride. In terms of why have humans at the heart of the story? Well, actually the fastest way to spread an idea is to describe it in terms of a human experience, because it's something that's instantly relatable. And actually, to make it as relatable as possible, we've got to describe it in all of that richness of details. You know, we want the flaws in their character because we care most about what happens to people like us, and then we will change our behavior accordingly. And actually, if you think about the people that we need to influence, governments, businesses, NGOs, they still seek the will of the people. So in terms of mobilizing for change, actually putting everyday people at the heart of the story is critical. How to do this? Well, let's show people working collaboratively together, and that includes with nature, to do things differently. And because of that, they have better lives. These stories need to be tailored very, very, very specifically to local circumstances. So they're all bound by specific culture, time and place. And actually, we need to work hard that these people represent tribes, if you like, that are outside of the traditional environmental tribe. We want people that are doing things with nature that we wouldn't expect to be done. And in doing that, we also want to kind of bring in some of the kind of values that are shared between the different tribes. So we want empathy, we want humility, we want selflessness. You've got a lot of this. What we need to do is make sure it's kind of brought to life in the most powerful way possible, and then shared effectively. So Ethiopia and Norway, for example. And that's really about retrieving and sharing stories. That's the kind of critical point here. In terms of the ordinary world, we're summing this up by the word broken. And what this means is that this is the sort of summary of the situation, if you like. This is the point of frustration that everybody has. We know systems are broken, and actually we're feeling that more at kind of a grassroots level. And that's manifesting itself in a fear for the future, and that fear is growing, and that's what we want to tap into in story terms. Why we want to tap into that? Well, actually, it's a universal emotional experience. So we don't need to explain it with facts and kind of data. We just know it's true because we feel it. And it makes a connection between the big global narratives and what's happening on the ground, what people are kind of seeing and kind of feeling in front of them. And it cuts across some of the barriers to cooperation between different sort of tribes. So actually that fear for the future is kind of shared, whether you're sort of fighting at the intersection of racism and climate breakdown, or poverty and biodiversity collapse. So it's a really kind of universally uniting feeling. How you do it? Well, actually, you've got to name it, you've got to label it, you've got to say it. So we want to really kind of own that message and keep hammering it home, because we know that something's got to change. We all know that. As well as labeling it, actually bringing it to light. So there's lots and lots of evidence. You don't need to kind of create this. There's lots out there that points to the lack of trust that's happening as a result of the kind of fear for future. And we can show that in terms of where our relationship with nature has gone wrong as well. Is another powerful tactic. You've got lots of this already. So again, it's about drawing on the insights through the Human Development Report, for example. And kind of what you need is really simplifying messages and imbuing them with emotion, make them emotionally driven, and then use them kind of repeatedly, and bring them to life with kind of case stories that show that lack of trust, the impact of broken systems, and where things have gone wrong. It's all about the power of symbolic imagery, because at this stage, we're just getting people to share a frustration. So if that's what's wrong with the ordinary world, let's look at what the world looks like when we've solved all the kind of problems. And we're summing this up with the word health. So who doesn't believe that life will be better when we have healthier relationships that are governed by healthier values, whether that's within communities and workplaces, or whether that's with nature itself? And we're going to see and feel that in very basic terms, be manifested in healthy livelihoods and how we're feeling about the future. So it's flipping from fear into hopefulness. Well, why would we do that? Well, health for a long time has been established as the most impactful way to kind of frame ideas about the natural world and human-made systems. So if you think about the ocean, the health of the ocean is a very powerful way of helping people understand and kind of connect, make the relationship, and understand why it's worth doing things differently. It's also right at the heart of all the Build Back Better stories of COVID-19, where we're looking not just to get back to normal, but to use this as an opportunity to recover and renew, build something healthier, is what people are looking for. How do we do it? Well, it's a very sort of broad vision of the future to draw upon, and actually draw many diverse versions of it, just have them linked through health. And we think at the moment that COVID-19 is almost kind of flipped Maslow's hierarchy of needs on its head, and we're sort of back down the bottom. And I think showing how you can be inspired to make healthy decisions means that you can better meet some of the immediate needs that you and your community have. And we need to be showing these as like win-wins when they are nature-based solutions as often as possible. So again, you've got lots of case stories that point to these successes, and what we need to be doing is bringing them out and sharing them in a highly targeted way. We need to be making these big picture very sort of specific to people's lives. Moving on to the call to adventure. So this is the trigger for the journey of change, and this is COVID-19. Well, this disruption that COVID-19 has caused, the feeling is it's changed things forever. We're not going to be going back. So actually we've got to seize this opportunity to go forward. It's just how we choose to do that. That's the key thing. That trigger of change has happened. So it's a kind of a push trigger, if you like. We need to kind of turn it into a kind of a pull one. All of the conversations at the moment around change are kind of shaped by COVID-19. It is the first and foremost challenge that's kind of facing us. It's created liminal states, the disruption, and actually that in a way makes change easier. And one of the things about it from a storytelling terms is that it makes great analogous links to the relationship between human development and biodiversity, and we want to be able to use and work with those. So how to do that? Well, to acknowledge that for most people, the idea of saving and protecting lives is the first and foremost threat to humanity, that actually we need to bring out the fact that underneath it, people are increasing their clamor for kind of change because of the kind of fear for future. And then we need to be able to reconstruct the stories of the recent past, and actually to look back at where we were spring, summer last year and be able to kind of say, well, this, you know, the COVID-19 is basically a sort of a trigger, but we were going in the right direction anyway. We just need to use this opportunity to go faster and further. Again, you've got a lot of momentum here with the partners and allies that are delivering Build Back messages. We've got the opportunity when the super year 2020 is reimagined and kind of delivered to work with the messaging framework there. But what you need is I guess the ability to reach those local communities where there are messengers that have really sort of high trust levels at the moment, and be able to understand the tactics and channels that are going to be able to get people at the right time and with the right message so they start doing something different. Within kind of story ingredients, there's always kind of like 3 challenges. And in this case, we're talking about protect, recover, and renew. In terms of summing these up, it is about saving lives and protecting jobs right now, but actually the opportunity to kind of renew systems and in doing so kind of protect nature. That's at the heart of what's going to allow us to kind of bounce back better. These challenges escalate. So we're very much in the kind of protect part now, and renew is something to kind of aspire to. And also, depending on where we are in terms of pre-surge, surge, and post-surge, these opportunities are going to shift. So if at the moment we're talking about saving jobs, we've then got to talk about how we're going to exit lockdown and get back to kind of families. And then we're going to be dealing with the new normal. So for example, remote working and digitization. As time goes by, it'll allow us to expand the messages around those challenges in terms of understanding how we can protect nature and how in doing that, we're going to be keeping our communities and ourselves safe. In fact, beyond safe, we're going to be able to improve them. And we're going to see that through new initiatives that are starting to happen. And then actually it's about holding people accountable to making those changes so that life does become better. Why use these 3 challenges in a story? Well, actually they're set to dominate the political, economic and social agendas for the next decade. These are going to be the themes of conversations. They work on a global scale. They can be tailored down to very local context, and actually they're offering a clear pathway for change to happen. It's a repeatable framework, and that's what we need to do, but you can do so tailoring to very, very specific issues in specific locations, for example, air pollution in particular cities. And that comes down again to this idea of telling the right story at the right time in the right place, because that's the only way we're going to be able to influence attitude and then behavior change. And actually it's understanding that these aren't linear in terms of a pathway, but that protect, recover and renew are a circular and kind of continual loop. And so the stories need to act in that way. In terms of what you've got that gives you an advantage here, you've got a distributed network of kind of storytellers who have a lot of nature-based solutions and expertise to hand, and that includes all the biodiversity NGOs that are part of your world. What we need to do is bring in more insights. We need to be able to understand which insights are working, where the most effective messages are, and then how to deploy them in a timely way. So they're not landing too early, but they're landing just at the right point. And then sort of understanding that those storytellers represent lots and lots of different communities and perspectives. So we need to be able to kind of bring those stories back in as much as we kind of send them back out. There's always a villain required in storytelling terms, that there's something that we need to overcome. There's something that we need to defeat to be successful. And at the apex, that's inequalities. That's why systems are broken, because inequality has gone too far in terms of connectivity, speed, greed, control. Why it works as a compelling villain in the UNDP story is because it's at the heart of human development, and it is the problem that you're trying to solve. And paradoxically, the narratives that associate human advancement with the richness of the economy have then also driven the human activities that have caused climate breakdown, biodiversity, and COVID-19. So it's right at the heart of the problems that we need to solve. And actually, they're going to be exacerbated. Inequalities will get worse. How to use them in a way where more people will want to see inequalities defeated? Well, there's the new generation of inequalities that we're seeing in terms of education, technology, and climate inequalities. Bringing that to life and making people aware will be a very important and powerful thing to do, to be able to kind of show how impacts are spreading to you, the individual, wherever you are in your community, rather than being another part of the kind of world. And how that relates, how inequalities relate to COVID-19 is very important. Possibly the most important point is actually to embed them in values and behaviors and beliefs that are detrimental to the good of the group and that are embedded in the broken systems, rather than the systems and the people that operate within the systems themselves. So it's going beneath and to something deeper. What you've got, well, actually, you've got a huge amount of kind of data and insights, particularly through the HDR and the indicators, and also opportunities to learn from some of the different storytellers within the kind of group that are really working well in how they express villain. So, for example, talking about it in terms of untapped potential, that is definitely something we want to see defeated. What you need, more stories that make links to other impacts, and particularly sort of making the connections that might not exist between what happens in one part of the world and the other. So famine and food banks, for example. Moving on, looking now at the kind of mentors and gifts, and also allies and gifts. We're summing this up as pathfinders. Really, for UNDP, this is all about bringing your leadership to fore, and that's leadership in nature-based solutions for development. There's a lot of trust that is missing in the world. One of the things that you bring that will be hugely advantageous for other people is trust, and then also the kind of quantified know-how. So as we kind of look for solutions, you've kind of got the evidence base and know-how that other people need and require. The urgency and influence right now on the COVID-19 response to recovery strategies is so high that joining the conversations needs to happen today, not tomorrow. The systems are broken and need fixing just at the time that public need trust in kind of governments and NGOs to do the right thing and to believe that they're going to do the right thing. So actually, your trust is really, really kind of important here. And change is hard and the journey is unclear. So trust has a really, really important role when systems are complex, decision-making isn't black and white, and we just have to go with the best possible direction and belief that the things that we're doing are the right things to do. How we do it? Well, actually, this is where stories are fantastic because they really bring to life success that other people can see. And I think certainly looking at the stories that you've got, there's a huge opportunity to elevate them, celebrate them, get them kind of shared and much more kind of widely known. It's about making connections between the healthy decisions that are taken to protect nature and advanced development. And then it's also about the quantification data. So this idea that you have got lots of evidence and lots of know-how, and how that's used in an open source way to initiate really innovative approaches to recovery. So you've got lots of networks at all levels. You've got lots of influence and conversations going on with the facility, for example. You have got a huge number of allies that can help people. So this really becomes about coordination. And the single most important thing is actually putting nature at the heart of development. If we're able to have a story that does that, you know, that is a story that the world is kind of crying out for and ready to listen to at the moment. And those stories will help bring to life what the UNDP's contribution is, both in terms of protecting lives and jobs, but also protecting the environment and that circular nature that the impact of doing that has. In terms of allies, so still within the kind of pathfinders, the great gift of COVID-19, if it can be described in that way, is the elevation of expertise. It's the elevation of kind of key workers in terms of who we trust, who we kind of rely on, and in particular, healthcare workers. So it's about how we work with these kind of key groups to make sure that we kind of carry across messages that are going to show people the way to make change happen. We need to do this in a way where we can learn from the action and behavior of others. We need to be inspired by new thinking, people that have made new connections and people that have already started to do things differently. And those real alternatives will help mobilize support. So it's when we see action being taken that we're encouraged to take it ourselves. And we can do that in a number of different ways. So one is starting to highlight the desire and the demand from key workers for systems renewal, because we're going to be listening to them. It's starting to kind of ground the real nature-based alternatives in real communities and kind of real lives. But that also includes like the true nature of cities. So tying things into today's culture is incredibly important. And then showcasing not just innovative products and services, but also kind of business models and kind of collaboration where people are doing new and surprising things to make things better. So you've got, again, lots of the evidence and know-how, and because of that, you've got the credibility to reach out and kind of recruit new allies, and you've got the networks to do that. What we need to do is have a story that brings to life a progressive and relevant strategy for human development. So this is really sort of putting it into the context of the lives we live today, and the real, it's sort of critical thing of bringing new allies in is thinking about the messengers with the most credibility. So new messengers that are attractive for people that are outside the traditional environmental tribes. And then a key part of any story is the moment of commitment, the crossing the threshold. And we're going to sum this up as rebirth. So really, this is a commitment to do something differently. It is about radical systems change on one level for governments and businesses to build back better, but it's also about behavior change for individuals and communities via the improved opportunities and choices that they create for themselves, but are also created for them by businesses and governments doing different things. Why use rebirth at this point of commitment? Well, actually, the concept of rebirth is one of the oldest mythological themes, and it lies deep in our collective psyche. So it cuts across all sort of tribal and cultural boundaries. And really importantly, it sort of includes redemption. So it allows people traditionally who've acted in a villainous way to move and become more heroic and to shift and become allies. It's a very powerful invitation for change. And really, really importantly, it's not just about sort of diagnosing the issue or pointing at the kind of solution. It's about the motivation and the hope that we need that kind of surrounds that. So what do we need to do to kind of drive a commitment to rebirth, to kind of create that as a lever? Well, actually, we need to mobilize mass public support, because that's going to be the incentivization that government and business needs. And actually, we're going to need to be able to, or one of the ways to do that is to capture tens of thousands of different actions that are happening, different commitments that are already being made. It's not about starting something new. It's about pulling together and amplifying what's already moving, and then showing blueprints and pathways that people can take. So you've got a lot of the partners that you would require to do this, and you've got a lot of the channels, for example, with the Super Year 2020 and how that's kind of reformatted. What we will definitely be looking to do, and why this is the last slide, is the novel campaign, new partners, really critically, whatever is being launched, strong feedback and testing mechanisms so that you can kind of move things along. When you know what's working, you can go harder. When something isn't working, you can drop it. And you need to be able to deliver that via a news story, of which these are just the ingredients. And you need to be able to realize that story at speed and scale for a distributed and open structure, so that people can own it and then tell it in a very local and specific way. So as an overview, that's the ingredients for creating stronger stories rather than representing a story in itself. And again, just different ways where you can see it being brought to life.
Thanks, Guy. Rosie.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Guy. So in the appendices, there's some additional longhand information which helps provide more context to the recommendations and the Optimum Master story. But if you want more information on the different sections of the research, please check out the other videos which deep dive into the research section by section. They've all helped create these recommendations.
Thanks very much, Guy and Rosie.